Alright guys, welcome back to the video notes section we do usually. Last week we kind of took a break, which I think was good. I look forward to seeing your discussion posts on that and some of your other work. Right now we're going to head back into the lecture notes idea, and we're going to really jump into World War II. And this first one is going to be talking about the lead up to World War II, what is happening in America, what is happening in Europe, 1931 to 1941, Great Depression, and that. So this is going to be pretty interesting. I'm excited about this one. This one's going to going from this week, and then it's going to go into next week as well. So this is going to be a little bit longer of a section, but I think, you know what, this is a topic that interests a lot of people, so I feel like, you know what the heck, let's take a little time with it. So first thing of all, I want you to look at that, and immediately I think it is the most common thing that we see that, and we immediately think of Nazi Germany. We think of Hitler, and this was the symbol of the Aryan race, anti-Jew, anti-minority, anti-religious, like Catholicism, Jewish, other religions. But actually, this goes way back, even as early as 7,000 years ago. This was appearing over in Eurasia for the idea of prosperity and good luck. So quite possibly this is the exact opposite of what Hitler portrayed this symbol as, is what it was 7,000 years ago. And even up to this day, there's religions over in Asia that still look at this symbol as a positive thing, as prosperity and good luck. Hitler kind of hijacked this symbol, stole this symbol, and kind of gave it probably pretty close to the worst connotation it could have, as a anti different groups, and even kind of almost like a hate symbol. Okay, so what is the lead up to the World War II? And it really starts out with the Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles, end of the Depression, but the Treaty of Versailles really leads to an anti-democratic governments in Europe and Asia, because really, remember Woodrow Wilson, the 14 points, he wanted to treat these the Germany, Austria, Hungary, all those guys with compassion. He didn't want to throw the book at them. He wanted to help them get up and going, but ultimately the powers in Europe do not listen to this, and they basically throw the book at them, and they humiliate them, and economically they make them pay a lot. So not only is it the depression, worldwide depression during this time, also these countries have to pay thousands and even millions of dollars in reparations. So they're humiliated, they are poor, and this leads to government takeovers that are not democratic. Italy, Benito Mussolini, he is a fascist leader. He is one of the first ones that come about and kind of rally the troops, so to speak, and kind of take over. Now, over in Europe, a lot of these countries want this control. They want this control in order to stop all of the slow economic growth and, all of this stuff. They want a strong leader to come in and take control. So that's why a lot of these leaders are able to do this. Soviet Union, or the United Socialist Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, Joseph Stalin takes over, Lenin dies. Germany is Adolf Hitler, and Japan is Hideki Tojo. And we will get into a little bit of each as we go here. But first of all, I want to talk about fascism. Fascism is really what describes the government of Italy under Benito Mussolini and Hitler in Germany. And fascism essentially is an aggressive nationalism. The nation is more important than the individual. The government is led by a dictator, and they were, oh my gosh, were they very anti-communist. Very anti-communist, because they believed that communists wanted to overthrow the government. Where in fascism, the government was more important than the individual. and groups of people, where communists believed that groups of people, the group, the person, the worker was more important than essentially the government. So there was a great fear that communism would overthrow government. Also, fascists believed that a nation only could become great, or one of the reasons it could become great was expanding its territory and building up its military. And as you can see, Hitler throughout history, what his goals were and what he did. He had a ginormous military, and he wanted to take over a lot of land. Here is just a little thing about early warning signs of fascism. The powerful and continuing nationalism. So just listen here. There's some. This is just a little like an infographic. Disdain for human rights, identification of enemies / scapegoats as a unifying cause. So that would be the Jewish population. Supremacy of the military, rampant sexism, controlled mass media. Obsessions with national security. Religion and government are intertwined. So yes, you don't have religion. Government is the religion. Corporate power is protected. Labor power is suppressed. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Obsession with crime and punishment. Rampant cronyism and corruption and fraudulent elections. And there's more. But that just gives you an idea of kind of what the ideas that were fascism kind of brought about. So the first guy, Benito Mussolini, they called him the Il Duce, and that also means the leader in Italian. He promised to restore Italy to its greatness, and the king was persuaded to appoint him as premier. Well, it's kind of the same idea that Hitler does. He gets the person who is in charge, the chancellor or the king, to say, hey, put me as, second in command. Put me as one of your main guys. And then eventually they work it, and they boom, with the military, they just kind of slam them hard and say, all right, you're done. I'm in charge now. And a dictatorship is born. When Benito Mussolini is coming back to Italy from World War I, he believed that Italy needed a strong leader. He believed that it was weak, and in order to become great again, they needed a very strong leader. He had support when he did this. He had support from industrialists, landowners, and the Roman Catholic Church. So you will see, if you read and learn a little bit more, Benito Mussolini had a strong protection and support from the Catholic Church going through this. That brings us to Joseph Stalin. Now, he is in Russia or in the Soviet Union. It is communism, and he took over the empire after Lenin died. In 1922, it was renamed to the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Okay, and in 1926. Or 1924, Stalin becomes dictator, and by 1926 he starts to industrialize the country. He does not tolerate any opposition, and he kills up to 8 to 10 million people that are disagreed with his plans for industrialization. He's a communism, and you said, hey, fascism hates communism. They do. But in the beginning, Stalin and Hitler, when Hitler starts taking over countries in the beginning of World War II, just the beginnings, Hitler and Stalin kind of form this group, and this group's going to allow them to kind of carve up land and kind of take for their own. It'll be after a while where then the Soviets will decide that they are enemies of Hitler and join the Central Allies. In Japan, this is Hideki Togo, I believe, or Hideki Togo, and he was the dictator of Japan. During the Depression, Japan suffered greatly because they didn't have resources. They lived on a tiny country, and they needed to import all their resources. So they believed in order to be a big empire, they needed to invade other countries, take over, and use them for resources. 1931, they invade Manchuria in China, and in order to, they do that, and then when they come back, many military leaders blame the country's problems on the correct politicians. And they also believed, Japanese people believed that democracy was un-Japanese. So what happens is they assassinate the prime minister when he tries to negotiate the end of the war between Manchuria and China. And therefore, General Hideki Togo and all of his military backed him. A lot of the people backed him, and he becomes essentially the dictator of Japan. And then the man we know very well, the picture, the iconic mustache, Adolf Hitler. He is also called Führer, which means leader in German. Yes. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi, was a fascist party. Remember, a fascism believes in the government over the people, believes in aggressive nationalism. 1923, tried to take over Munich and march on Berlin, but failed and was arrested. While he was arrested, he did his famous book Mein Kampf, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But the Treaty of Versailles left Germans with an intense hatred for the Allied powers. Absolutely intense hatred because of the humiliation that they bestowed on them. So while in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf, and where he talked about the master race. And Mein Kampf means my struggle. His autobiography that he dictated while he was in jail, Master Race, he promoted that, of Aryans. And he believed Aryans tend to be blonde-haired, blue-eyed individuals. They believe that Jews, Slavs, Slavic people were inferior. They were less than human. The Mein Kampf included plans to take over other land by force so that Aryans would have a living space. Hitler's rise to power after prison, he became politically active, got Nazis elected to the Reichstag, or that means German Congress. Eventually, he was appointed chancellor, and then was voted as dictator by his dictator of Germany by his peers. So he doesn't go in with a military and overthrow the government. He goes in, he plays nice, he becomes part of the government, eventually, he talks people into the right people into talking chancellor, second in command to the president or the whatever, the person, the number one, and then eventually, boom, look at here. He is dictator. So the Nye Committee in 1934, we're going to jump back into the United States, and right now there is World War II is starting to start. Hitler is starting to cause some problems over there, maybe start some conflict, and there's been many times where people are looking at America to come in and help. But Senator Gerald Nye of North Dakota, now this is Nye Committee, this is nationwide, but this guy's from North Dakota, Gerald Nye, held hearings to research the huge profits made by arms factories during World War I. He found out that World War I, the arms factories made ginormous amounts of money. And he said that a lot of the reasons why we went into World War I was the reason by arms, these huge profits. So he said, hey, we cannot do this again. He said that we need to not get involved with this war. We cannot allow factories, big corporations to get us into war because of money. And he and many people come up with this idea, well, not come up with this idea, but decide to turn to isolationism. And we know isolationism is staying isolated from the outside world and not getting entrapped in any conflict. Now, meanwhile, European countries announced that they're not going to pay us back for war debts from World War I. So between the Europeans saying we can't pay you back anymore, and Gerald Nye, this idea of isolationism becomes very popular in the United States. Here are some plans to keep the U.S. out of the war in Europe. Neutrality Act of 1935, no sales of weapons to countries at war. And then that same act of 1937, any non-military purchases by countries at war must pay cash and use their own ship. Why? Why do you think that? Well, for one reason, in World War I, we were shipping things to Europe, and guess what? We were bombed. U-boats took us down. Okay. Why did we not want to? Why did other countries have to pay debt or pay cash? Well, we did not want countries to be indebted to us, or we did not want to have debt with any other countries. We did not want to be tied financially to other countries. In World War I, we were tied financially to the war. Also during this time, Germany, Italy, and Japan are forming their alliance. And that alliance will ultimately be called the Axis powers, or what we call them, the Axis of Evil. And this internationalism. So we have isolationism, and now we have this idea of internationalism. It's the belief that trade between nations creates prosperity and helps prevent war. The U.S. should try to persevere peace in the world. So FDR believes that, you know what, in order to create prosperity and to prevent war, we need to be out trading with other nations. We need to be visible. We need to be out there trading. So FDR sells weapons to China when Japan invaded Manchuria. Technically not a declared war. Okay? But he sold them, and he wanted to prevent this epidemic of lawlessness from infecting the world. So how he got around that was technically it wasn't a declared war, so therefore he could sell weapons to China because they were not in a declared war. Okay, and he felt like by doing this we would prevent an epidemic of lawlessness. So basically he's selling guns to stop a war. Interesting, but okay. All right, guys, that is the end of this one. I believe there's if you are in U.S. history, you got questions to answer at the end. There should be 2. If you are in dual credit, you have just a small short answer essay to do. It is small. Don't freak out, dual credit people. You can do it. All right, thank you so much. Then after this, we will do section 2 for this week. And then we'll be done with our video notes. There'll be a couple other assignments as well. Total of 4 because there's 4 days. All right, guys. Talk to you later.